I'm Tracy Austin, your host of the People Strategy Podcast. This show provides interviews with organizational leaders and ongoing coaching experiences that highlight elevating people in organizations through a people strategy roadmap. Welcome to the People Strategy Podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Austin, where we will dive into the latest trends and best practices in talent management and organizational development. Join me as I chat with industry experts, HR leaders, and business innovators to uncover strategies that can elevate your people and your business. And, I want to do a shout out to a previous guest, Bob Gregg. Bob is an attorney, and we chatted about very specifically how we really do things morally right and within the laws to create work environments that are best for our employees. And I wanted to shout Bob out today because on our show today, I'm excited to introduce Andrew Barnes. And Andrew worked with his organization on, kind of by accident, creating the 4-day work week. And of course, our podcast is brought to you by the Team Retention Program, which is offered by Elevated Talent Consulting. And I'm curious, Andrew, for you, what is one of the key ways a manager can retain their top talent while increasing productivity?
Hi, Tracy. It would be remiss of me if I didn't say what you should do is initiatives like the 4-day week. But the reason I say that is what we actually do with this is we give people through the 4-day week something that is important to them. It's all too easy often in companies that we decide that we're going to do things like we'll have a gym membership, or we'll do this, or we'll do that. We'll have a football table down the end. And that's meant to make everybody feel better and everybody more loyal to the organization.
But is it what they really want?
Well, exactly right. Is it what they really want? And what we found when we did the 4-day week, what was really interesting is the bulk of this is about saying to people, I'm going to give you something unique. And that unique thing is time. Have time, and then do with that time what you want to do. And what we then see is engagement scores go up, in our case, 40%. So engagement, enrichment, empowerment, team cohesion, ability to recruit, ability to retain, all of these scores actually just go off the planet. And it's not rocket science, it's understanding that what motivates us often as leaders isn't what motivates our people. And when you put it a different way and we give them something that they choose to do something with, then you get a far better outcome than some of these top-down initiated ideas.
Right. It's like the Employment Engagement Survey 101 for our HR listeners, right? It's like what we want is not the same thing as what our team wants. And, I will be remiss. We jumped right in, but I want to just go back and say, why should we listen to Andrew? Well, there's lots of reasons to listen to Andrew today, but, I'll do, sort of a formal-ish not introduction. Andrew's an innovator, entrepreneur, and philanthropist, founder of Perpetual Guardian, which is where this experiment with a 4-day work week has been. There's thousands of podcasts and articles on it, and I'm thrilled to have you on. So we'll continue our conversation now.
Thanks, Tracy.
You like how we just do it backwards? We'll figure it out.
Yeah, quite.
So, at the very beginning, you're at Perpetual Guardian, you're on a plane, you're reading this, article, and you go, this would be fun. What was the driver to have you say, let's play with giving time back to our employees? Because what did you actually want out of that?
Well, I always feel a bit of a fraud about this because what I wanted to do was I wanted to work out how I could improve productivity. And what I was prompted by, these articles said that, people in the UK and Canada were productive for 2.5 to 3 hours a day. And what they were doing was saying, look, people may well be busy for the whole time they're at work, but are they productive? And when you cut out busyness, the productive side was comparatively small. So I then said, well, what is that happening in my company? If it is happening in my company, what could I do to change it? And you could think about things like, interruptions at work. Statistically, once every 11 minutes, you take 22 minutes to get back to full productivity. If you could get rid of interruptions, what would that do? You have people bringing their home life in because they've got no choice. I've got to chase up that plumber. I've got to book that doctor's appointment. I've got all of those disruptions. And so what I wondered was that if I gave people more time and I said to them, right, I'm going to give you a day off, what would you do differently at work so you could do your job in 4 days rather than 5? And it was as simple as that. We had no idea whether it would work. We just thought, well, let's try it. Let's actually see what happens if you give people the gift of time, but in return, they give you the gift of better productivity. And who'd have thought that healthier, happier, more engaged employees would be more productive?
Yeah. And it's like, I know for me, when I have a deadline, the amount I can get done in an hour before that deadline is incredible.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, effectively, as a job expands to fill the time available. So inevitably, if you reduce the time available, 9 times out of 10, the job gets done. Otherwise, it just stretches out. I mean, again, it's sort of Parkinson's law, isn't it? So we all know this. I think that we are constrained as leaders because we are conditioned that working longer is working harder. And what I think I was trying to say to my people is, why not just work smarter? And if you can work smarter, then we should get better output.
Right. Absolutely. So, we work with a lot of manufacturing construction, and, what I so often see is that we're still measuring the butt in seat time, even after COVID, even after all these things. It's what is the amount that your butt is in the seat versus, how are we actually measuring productivity? And I think how do we measure productivity? I'm not sure it's been 100% defined yet for all the roles. And I think therein lies so much of the leadership issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, the number one question I always get asked when I'm talking about 4-day week is a chief executive will look me in the eyes and say, but how do you measure productivity? And I go, well, how are you measuring productivity? Because what you're telling me is you're actually not measuring it. You are measuring the time that you are clocked on, or the amount of time you've got your bum on the seat, as you say. So the reality is measurement of output, however you do it, is clearly a prerequisite for better performance. Now, we had this problem. We have a company which had all sorts of different departments, some of which it was an easy measurement. How many widgets do you produce? How many documents do you produce in a given time? In the other ones, we went to our team and said, how should we measure you? You've got to prove you can do your job in 4 days rather than 5. So what are the outputs? Now, that was an interesting exercise because it was as much about the employee going, actually, maybe I shouldn't be doing that, as much as saying, this is what I do. So it's like process re-engineering from the bottom up. And you started to focus on what was the core. Now, to put that in context, we are now, after 5 years of this, twice as productive on a per capita basis as our nearest competitor in our sector in New Zealand.
And that's phenomenal. That's amazing.
That's phenomenal. And we're working 4 days a week rather than 5. And our cost to income ratio is, I think, 40% better than that. Now, that's an extraordinary outcome. So, but I mention this because what I want, listeners to take away that I'm not just guys sitting here going, hey, let's have a better work-life balance. I'm saying this goes to the heart of better output, better productivity, better business. And if you can pull this off, the benefits to your organization are actually, material, absolutely material. We're seeing improvements. I think the average of the US trial was about 36% improvement in productivity.
And that's phenomenal. And it's like, as we look at this, and I look at, when my kids were little, I worked 4 days a week and my husband worked 3 12s a week. We saved on childcare. I was still producing out of full-time capacity. And because I'm like, I need to get home, I need to do these things. So it's like you compartmentalize a lot different and your focus is very different, and now it's like this morning I have water shooting out of some hose somewhere. So I've got a couple buckets because I called the plumber, right? But it's like, when life happens, we need to be able to be there for life. And I know that you've got some research stats on absenteeism and the dollars that it's actually saved on absenteeism with the 4-day week because we're allowing life to happen because we're giving time.
Yeah, look, on average, and this is consistent, and we've run about 20 of these trials now across the world. Consistently, absenteeism drops by about 60%, 65 to 67. I think it was the UK and USA. So, was that a big deal? Well, on the UK statistics, quite interesting here. They lose 19 million person days a year to absenteeism, costing the UK economy £45 billion. So if that was translated, it's a big if, but if that was translated across the economy, there you go, almost £20 billion into the economy. This is not immaterial. And what I think what's happening here is you're seeing in the statistics, you're seeing that society is struggling with the way we work now in the 21st century, where we don't have the time for, families, communities, all of that's going because actually everybody is being forced into a situation they've got to work. Now, you can't buy a house unless two people are working, certainly in New Zealand. So it's one of those problems. We're making it so that you have to work, but then we're not reshaping the work so means that you can live. And I think that is at the heart of what we're trying to do here, is to find a better way. Why is it that we're still doing what we did 100 years ago when how we worked 100 years ago is materially different from the way we work today?
Oh, absolutely. Because 100 years ago, you had one person that was staying at home and taking care of the household, and that was normal. That's no longer the case. So now we're shifting all of that together, and as we talk about 100 years ago versus today, I think we've seen a loss of community. We've seen a loss of connection in our towns and in our cities. We've seen a loss of connection within our service groups. And so much of that is due to time. And so much of that is, due to probably 100 different things. But I'm curious, how does the gift of time and how have you seen that translate into greater community connection with employees in those organizations?
Well, we did some research on it, and also there's been some research done by Henley Business School, again in the UK. And what you find is one of the biggest things that people want to do is spend more time with their families. That is clearly number one. But up there in the top 5 is volunteering, is actually doing things back in the community. And the one I particularly like an example of this, it's the City of Golden police force who went on a 4-day week. And what I liked was that the posts from the police chief started to talk about the fact that their officers were able to go and do the sausage sizzle at the school. They were able to do all those community things, which meant that the officers were actually out there in the community as humans, as opposed to police. And what that does is then that started to improve the connection between the police force and the community. You look at things like my dad's a Rotarian, has been a Rotarian for about 40 years. He's 96. The average age of his Rotary Club in Ilkley, I would say, is about 75, because there's nobody young coming into Rotary. This is the organisation that effectively eradicated polio worldwide. And what we're doing is we're saying the time to spend in those community groups, is no longer there. So those organizations are struggling to attract younger people to them because our work environment no longer creates the time for people to do that. I think we lose something. My own island here, I live in an island off Auckland. All our major community events, which were run by volunteer groups, have broadly collapsed in the last 5 years. We lose something. We're poorer because of that. And so I think that it's easy for us as business leaders to say, oh, well, that's nothing to do with me because I'm focusing on my business. But, you know, a stable, prosperous economy community creates a better environment in which we can sell our goods. And I think it's instructive when you look at why Henry Ford, who's credited with the 5-day week in the States, you know, brought it in. It wasn't because he wanted to create a work-life balance. He wanted to create a market for his products.
Right.
And you know, heck, if you had a day off a week, you went to church, right? And you didn't need a car. But if you had a Saturday off, you could take the kids to the beach.
Right.
And that is part of what we have to look at here, that it is that broader question is, what if we gave people more time? If you're looking at it purely from a business perspective, what business opportunities would arise as a consequence of having people with more time? And I think the evidence suggests that actually it would be materially beneficial in terms of society, education, health, infrastructure, environment. And because it impacts those things beneficially, ultimately that will come around full circle and mean your taxes will be less because you're not going to have to pay for all of the things that we're now struggling to try and correct because generally people have no time. Now, that's a little evangelical, possibly, but, but there is a hard-nosed element to it.
Right. And I think a key piece there is we're missing the relationships. I mean, you and I both know businesses created off of relationships. You know, Dr. Jeremy Wise introduced you to me. I asked you to come on the podcast. We spent some time getting to know each other. And so when we're not involved in those community organizations, when we're not going to those conferences, when we're not involved in, you know, I was involved in Cub Scouts and I was involved in the kids swim team and this and that and whatever else. When we're not involved in those things, we're not creating the relationships that are either business or personal or whatnot that really creates that community. And that to me is a huge piece that as business leaders, it's not just the time, but it's, are we encouraging the Rotary clubs? Are we encouraging those clubs and going to your kids' baseball games, et cetera, as almost a prerequisite to being a good citizen at work as well? And I think that there's an and both there that's so important.
Yeah. And they are our future citizens. They're our future employees. I mean, we don't operate in a vacuum. I wish in some ways it's easy if we did, you know, but we don't. And
because they see everything and they parrot it.
Yeah. So, you know, the point I keep coming back to, I just think that a rethink of how we work, rather than just blindly accepting this arbitrary division of the day into 3 components and, you know, you work for 5 days and you have 2 days off. It actually, if we rethink it, reshape it, we reshaped everything else. I think people will find that there is a better way. It's just arbitrary. It isn't the pinnacle of human achievement to operate that way.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge. Now, it's easy, I think, as a business leader, actually, I'm interested in my stock options for the next 3 years and I'm going to be out of here. And so why would I challenge the status quo? Why would I try something different? But, you know, I think we've got to be better than that.
And I think the reason to try is because you care about what's there and the outcomes that you're getting. If your stock options go up, that's a great outcome for you too.
well, that's right. And there's a wonderful piece of research out of Oxford University that shows that the happier your company, the better it performs on the S&P 500.
Right.
Now, again, who'd have thought that happier employees would be more productive? I mean, this isn't rocket science, but, it is one of the challenges that we think in terms of our human capital as just capital rather than human. And I think that's what we've got to change. Humans work better when they are treated as humans rather than if they're just treated as a piece of machinery. But even with a bit of machinery, you actually maintain it. You turn it off occasionally. You make sure
what is your preventative maintenance program for your staff?
Quite.
Right.
And they, and again, I think we forget that. We don't focus on the fact that, people burn out. And so what we're seeing, I think, with the 4-day week, it's really about enabling people to perform at their peak for longer during the working week by giving them more time off.
Yeah.
And there's lots of data on why this works. So, but I don't say to people, look, you must do this. I just say, well, look, gosh, why wouldn't you try it?
Yeah.
Because if you don't try it, you don't know.
Right. And that's with everything. If we don't try it, we don't know. And I think employee engagement, you talked about happier, folks listening on my podcast hear us talk and guest talks about engagement all the time. And it's like employee engagement is that distinction between the have to curve. I'm going to have to do as minimal as I can, which means we're wasting a whole ton of time on busyness versus that want to. What can I do in this period of time? So I'm completely engaged in getting those outcomes and knowing what winning looks like and excited about it and rolling. And that's what we're seeing. And I love, you mentioned the police department previously, and, I've got a couple quotes here. Jennifer Fairweather said that, look, they've seen an increase in applicants and staff retention since implementing the 4-day schedules. That right there, staffing right now is a huge concern. And so
we saw on that, we saw one company in our US trial where the number of applicants went up 200%.
And that's incredible.
200%.
And they're the qualified applicants.
Yeah. Now, look, I have to say, my company is possibly the most boring company in New Zealand. We do death, right? I mean, we are a trust company, and nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to work for a trust company. Because if you do, you need medical help, frankly. But
HR is the same thing, though, Andrew. I mean,
yeah, I know. But they literally, we had people lining up to join the company because it said more about how we approached business, how we approached the work environment than anything else. And you're right, in a competition for talent, when you ask under 25s, it is having more time is actually a key issue. And that's why we see so many under 25s going into gig jobs. Now, long term, I'm a huge, I'm probably nobody's going to talk to me in the US after I say this, but I just don't like gig. I don't like gig because I think what it does is it puts off the issues of the future in terms of healthcare, superannuation, sick pay. All of those issues are being pushed off down the track, and somebody somewhere will pick the tab up for those later on. And it also means that a lot of our young people are not getting a career the way that we got a career. They're not learning, they're not being developed. And I think that when you look at why that happens, a lot, certainly in Australia, New Zealand, UK, the research there is that time was why people went there. They wanted more time. They wanted to control their life in a better way. And so actually, all of those people are not considering the conventional work environment,
right?
Not because what you're offering isn't interesting, it's because how you offer it isn't interesting. And I think we are losing talent to traditional businesses
Mhm.
because we're not rethinking how we work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's like I talk to a ton of fractional folks, and I always ask the question, why did you go into fractional? Because I can tell immediately if you went in for the right reasons or not. And when I hear time, or I hear, I just didn't like working for someone, or I'm going, okay, that is not the right reasons why I want to connect on this, and so within that, it's, I'm definitely hearing that over and over and over again. It's the flexibility. And when you ask these folks, there's a privilege too, because they have insurance through someone else. They've got other things that are able to support that, which is not sustainable.
Yeah, I agree. So, again, it's looking at our environment and saying, actually, can we try something else? And that's all there is here. It's not I'd like to think there was massive, science behind what we do. I think it's just applied common sense, and it's like a basic school experiment. I have a hypothesis that if you give people more time, they will work better and more efficiently. And so by running a pilot, that's all we're doing. We're putting out the hypothesis. We're conducting an experiment. We're looking at the results. And if it didn't quite work, tweak the experiment, try it again, and have a look. And what we're seeing is it does work. We've run these pilot programs and we've worked with companies all over the world. And the results, regardless of industry. So, anybody who says it, well, it doesn't work in manufacturing, bad news. Volkswagen is on a 4-day week. Lamborghini is on a 4-day week. Logistics companies, health. There are, I think, Stanford Medical School is on a 4-day week. You just keep going. That somewhere in the world there is somebody offering a method of working that means that they are able to attract and retain the highest quality staff. Now, just this morning, we got a call that's come through from Dubai to go on their news tonight, because the Dubai government has just announced for the summer it's going to put the country on a 4-day week. And the reason, because the ruler of Dubai has said, I want my city to be the best place in the world to live and work.
Right.
Now, he won't. I'd like to say he's first. He's not. Sharjah in the Gulf has already done it, right? So what you're starting to see is people saying, how do I create an environment and attract and retain the best people? Well, it isn't doing what we've currently done.
Right. Because what we're doing now will not get us a different result. So, as we start to close up, I'm really curious. Do you have any last thoughts to leave with our listeners that are mostly US based, that, we don't have the same laws, we don't have the same requirements, as many other parts of the world. And yet, this seems really challenging and daunting to some, but yet, and I'll put in the show notes some of the articles from the Golden Police Department that have some fantastic statistics there. But, what are some of your kind of final thoughts on what would it look like to implement this in your organization, to really think about if you wanted to bring this forward?
Bizarrely, the US is one of the easiest countries in the world to implement this. And that is because you don't have prescriptive legislation around hours worked, holidays, all of these things that in the rest of the world, when we try and create this flexible environment, which is, I will gift you 40 days off a year if you deliver me the same level of productivity. And if you don't, back to 5 days. That's the thesis of what we call the 100-80-100 rule: 100% pay, 80% time, 100% productivity. You don't have those problems in the States. So actually, implementing this is the easiest country in the world to implement this is the United States, because you can make it flexible.
Right.
What you've then got to do, though, is The one thing that I think the US does better than anywhere else in the world is this idea of that I can be whatever I want to be.
Yep.
And so inevitably, your leaders, for the most part in business, are incredibly driven, incredibly ambitious, it's almost impossible to say there isn't a barrier that you can't climb. And you can see that the way that the Magnificent Seven dominate certain aspects of technology in the world today. The problem is that you then, as an employer, assume that everybody in your organization thinks like you. And that as a consequence, everybody wants to work every hour that they can, that money is the sole motivator, that everything has to be driven that way. And actually, the reality is that's not the case.
So our biggest issue is our mindset and our thoughts about it. And if we change those, then we have the possibilities that come forward.
That's exactly right.
Amazing. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. And for our listeners, I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. We would love a 5-star review and why you're giving that to us, of course, along with check out the information from Andrew that we will have in the show notes, along with some of those links to where this has been implemented in trials in the US. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening today. I'd love to connect with you. If you'd like to connect, you can find me on LinkedIn at Tracy, Traci Austin, and at our website at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. If you'd love to learn more about our process, please reach out to us. And again, thank you so much for listening and sharing your feedback with us through a review. Have a fantastic day.